Ghost Story, Ghosts on the Village Dike. Author, Anonymous. This was the third time he clearly felt an invisible hand as cold as ice running all over his body. It took about 15 seconds and he lay stiff as a statue. The curtain across the door shook slightly, and then the sound of the long tape squeaking in the night. He tried to regain his composure and reached out to turn on the main light bulb to brighten the room. Outside, the north wind was still blowing briskly. The bamboo shoots were swaying as if they were about to fall into the silvery white river surface. Suddenly, Mock, still huddled in the corner of the kitchen, startled and barked loudly. It barked all the way to the edge of the dike for a long time before it stopped. That night, he turned on the electric light, covered himself with a blanket, and sat nodding on his bed until the rooster crowed all over the neighborhood before he dared to lie down. When he woke up the next morning, he was sure he had seen a ghost last night. He went out to the wharf and waited for Mr. Baychuck to land his small fishing boat into the Nipa Palm Grove, then asked, "Father, is there a ghost outside our dike house?" Mr. Bay tied the boat to a coconut shell and walked step by step on the monkey bridge made of a few original bamboo trees. As he walked, he gruffly replied to the child, "You're a ghost. Baychuck has never seen a ghost in his life, and there are no ghosts in my house." He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something more, but looking at Mr. Bay's demeanor, it seemed like he was about to get angry, so he couldn't help it. Every time, he never dared to touch his father's anger. But not only him, there are not many people in this whole neighborhood who can withstand Baychuck's anger. When Baychuck gets angry, he looks like a hungry tiger that has lost its prey or something like a thunderstorm. To be honest, usually Mr. Bay rarely speaks and is always alone on the wharf making bamboo, sharpening bamboo sticks and then going to the river to cast nets and set traps. When the season comes, they carry hoes to the fields and work hard from morning until late at night before returning home. If you have the right thing, work hard to know it. Don't overindulge in anything, eat whatever you want, don't demand or criticize anything salty or bland. Throughout the villages up and down, whoever hired Baychuck did it, never having to worry about heavy work or light work. Therefore, it rarely offends anyone. Therefore, people turn to abstain from Baychuck's anger like they abstain from the full moon day. But I also have to say, she's really good at enduring. Even if Baychuck lies idle at home all day or works hard with bamboo and potato patches in front of the alley, he rarely opens his mouth to say a meaningful sentence to his daughter. Father and son are like two deaf and mute people. But he understood the old man maybe better than he understood himself. Just by looking at him, he knew what the old man wanted, how hungry he was, what he liked to eat, and especially when he was about to get angry. So no matter what anyone says, he insists that Mr. Bay is the best father in the world. The old man seemed to love his child no less. If he had a delicious piece of food, he would abstain from eating it, his face grimacing. "Dash, the big fish that you cooked is so salty, no one can eat it." Saying that, he reached out with his chopsticks and picked up a little bit of the head, leaving the whole thing for the child. Outsiders would not think that the old man was very difficult. But the old man wasn't difficult, he just didn't know how to talk without being embarrassed, so he found an excuse to be angry. Grumpy but not grumpy. This is something only children can understand. Just like this morning, the old man was about to get angry with her just because he couldn't speak. It's hard to say, the story of the ghost. That night, he did not sleep at night anymore. Just at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Mr. Baychuck took the boat out to set up his trap, and when he was done, he turned the boat back to the wharf and sat down to smoke. It was just getting dark, and the little girl could clearly see that the old man was very worried, very sad, very tired, but he did not dare to come closer. He sat in the kitchen, looking at his father's behavior, and just wanted to cry. He knew that every time Mr. Bay sat like that, he would not be able to sleep that night, and he also knew that his heart was filled with things that he would never know or touch. The north wind still blows dry and cold. Occasionally, a few light bulbs passing by at night in front of the wharf then suddenly stop, pull into a few holly groves, gently lift the tree face down into the cold water, or scoop it up patiently and patiently. The cigarette butt in the old man's mouth flared up from time to time, clearly illuminating the wrinkles and rough eye sockets. But it only took a few seconds to return intact, a small, lonely spark in the extremely dark night. The boats that go out to light the night are gradually becoming fewer, and only a few lanterns remain on the river, shining like the red eyes of a nocturnal aquatic species. Mr. Bay is still sitting there. In the kitchen wing, the child huddled. It was always the same. Every time Mr. Baychuck sat and lit a cigarette on the dock, he huddled in the kitchen looking out as if he was sitting watchful for some fragile hope. Sometimes she wanted to light up the fire to keep warm but stopped. She was afraid of disturbing her father's terrifying silence, or maybe he was afraid of disturbing the turmoil tormenting his father's heart. The mold, still lying at his feet all this time, raised its black beak to sniff, sniff, or tilt its head to the side, pricking its ears to listen. It got up, ran into the alley, curled its tail, raised its muzzle, and barked. The little girl shivered slightly and turned to look at her father, her expression still unchanged. The only thing was a small spark between two fingers that was moving up and down continuously. He wanted to scream, scream loudly. "Dad, the ghost has come back to you." But he absolutely couldn't open his mouth. Beyond the dike slope, a dim black shadow appeared. Sometimes, that black shadow seemed to be lifted into the air by some bent bamboo branches. The shadow gets closer every day. He began to clearly hear the sound of soft, gingerly, hesitant footsteps on the steps. Then the door panel emitted the sound of old and tiredness. He clearly felt yesterday's cold hands sliding down his body from his long hair down to his back, his chubby cheeks to his soft fingers that were stiff with fear. A cold stream of air ran down his spine, and he sat there in the dark kitchen, looking up helplessly at his father for help. Once again, the screen groaned with a labored sound, letting the cold breath of nothingness rush out of the kitchen. And plaintive cries began to echo from the wharf. The cigarette lighter that was the focal point for him to see his father is no longer there. He realized hot tears were rolling down his cheeks, but he couldn't cry out loud or open his mouth to call out. Dad. Mr. Bay's voice weakly spoke. I beg you. Please forgive me, forgive the child. It's been more than 20 years, you're still tormenting my father and I haven't had a day of peace yet. Well, I'll accept what I did, but what's wrong with the child? I know my fault, I stayed and raised him until he was a teenager, but that's not enough to make up for my sins. Mr. Bay's voice became weaker and weaker. He suddenly stood up, all fear seemed to disappear with the barking of Mock, and rushed down to the wharf. Dad. Wake up, Dad. I'm here, Dad. Wake up, Dad. He reached out and hooked a flashlight under the boat compartment. The round blue light clearly illuminated the old man's pale face. Baychuck forced himself to look at his child, gasping for breath. You stay here and try to live your life to the fullest. From now on, I'm sure no more ghosts will come looking for you. Don't be afraid anymore. Just sleep well. At night, remember to close the door tightly. Watch out for bad guys, remember. 2 days later, people took the ghost to the field. The north wind still blows debris on the dike. The girl in her early 20s wearing a shabby white scarf slowly limped behind the coffin. People started talking again, talking about things that maybe they hadn't talked about for more than 20 years, but it seemed like no one couldn't remember every little detail. From being an orphan boy, spending all day in the river, to not being able to get a wife. The poor guy suddenly got caught by someone, got drunk and raped a beggar woman to death right on the dike. He woke up so regretful that he wanted to die, but was afraid of being guilty, so he threw the body of the beggar's daughter into the river and took her underage daughter to raise as his own. Because of the guy who doesn't love his child so much, he's afraid that the child will hate him, so every time he hears someone mention the old story, he gets angry like a thunderbolt. He was in good health, but he probably died because of that beggar mother from the past. It's so pitiful to think. Poor orphaned DYKE. Poor child who accepted his mother's murderer as his father for so long. Run out of.